It was an ordinary Tuesday morning at the downtown branch of Grand Oak Bank. Customers were quietly waiting in line, flipping through their phones or tapping impatiently on the counters. The tellers were busy processing deposits and withdrawals, chatting occasionally, completely unaware that their day was about to take a strange turn. The automatic doors opened with a soft whoosh, and an old black man stepped inside. He carried a worn, slightly dusty sack slung over his shoulder. His clothes were simple, an old jacket with patches, faded trousers, and a hat that had seen better days. Most of the people in the bank barely noticed him at first. He walked slowly, carefully, as if every step mattered. His eyes scanned the room with quiet confidence, sharp and intelligent, the kind of eyes that seemed to see more than anyone else could. The tellers looked at him for a moment, exchanged curious glances, and returned to their work. The man approached the front desk, rested his sack on the polished counter, and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "I am here to claim what belongs to me. I am the owner of this bank." For a moment, silence filled the air. Then, almost immediately, laughter erupted. A young teller, barely out of college, leaned back in her chair and chuckled, whispering to her co-worker, "Did he just say he owns the bank?" Another teller smirked, shaking her head. "Yeah, sure, and I'm the President of the United States." Even the bank manager, a tall man with a crisp suit and perfectly combed hair, stepped forward, his face painted with amusement and mild irritation. "Sir," he said, trying to keep his voice firm but failing to hide a smile, "this is a busy bank. Are you sure you're in the right place? No one just walks in and claims ownership like that." The old man smiled faintly, not in offense, but in quiet amusement. "I am quite sure," he replied. "I have the documents to prove it, but first I would like to speak with someone in charge." His voice was gentle, but there was a firmness to it that made people pause for a moment. The manager waved him off, still laughing. "We don't have time for games, sir. If you have papers, bring them to the office and we'll see what we can do. Until then, you should leave." Instead of leaving, the old man simply set his sack down carefully, resting it on the counter. The sack looked ordinary, worn from years of travel or use, nothing remarkable about it at first glance, but there was a weight to it, as if it held something important, something powerful. Customers began to notice it, whispering among themselves. Some took out their phones, secretly recording the scene. Curiosity began to replace the laughter. What could this old man possibly carry in such a sack? Why did he speak as if he truly owned the bank? A young woman in line leaned toward her friend and whispered, "Do you think he's crazy, or is this some kind of scam?" The friend shrugged, eyes wide. "I don't know, but he doesn't look like the type to make jokes." Meanwhile, the old man did not raise his voice or act impatient. He simply waited, standing with quiet dignity, observing the reactions of the people around him. The manager, growing slightly uncomfortable as he saw the attention shifting, called security. Two young guards approached, their hands resting casually near their belts. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside," one said politely. "We don't allow false claims here." The old man's eyes met theirs calmly. "I'm not making a false claim. In time you will understand. For now, I only ask that you let me wait here." He spoke as if every word was carefully measured, deliberate, and impossible to argue with. Some of the older customers started to notice the tension. "Who is this man?" whispered one. "He seems serious, not like the usual panhandlers or scammers we see outside." The bank, once a place of routine, had turned into a stage of curiosity, suspense, and quiet disbelief. Even the laughing staff had slowed, unsure of how to respond. Then, almost as if on cue, the old man reached into his sack, pulling out a small folder. He placed it gently on the counter. It looked unremarkable, just a few papers at first glance, but there was an aura of authority about them. The manager, still skeptical but curious, leaned closer to peek. The papers had old stamps, signatures, and markings that looked official, though faded with age. Customers leaned in too, trying to catch a glimpse. Murmurs spread through the room. Could it really be true? Was it possible that this humble, worn-looking man actually had a claim to the bank? The old man, noticing the growing attention, said nothing more. He let the laughter die down on its own, replaced now with a quiet tension. The security guards, unsure of what to do, waited. The manager, his pride stung by the sudden attention, tried to regain control. "Sir," he said firmly, "if you have proof, we will review it, but you need to cooperate with our office." The old man nodded, agreeing politely, but there was a spark in his eyes, a hint that this was only the beginning. By the time the old man settled in the lobby, placing his sack at his side, it was clear that this ordinary Tuesday had turned extraordinary. Every person in the bank, from tellers to customers, could sense it. This was no ordinary visitor. Something about him commanded attention, respect, and curiosity. Laughter had faded into uncertainty. Everyone wondered, who was this man? What did he truly carry in his sack? And how could someone so unassuming possibly own a bank? The stage was set. The ordinary had become extraordinary, and the old man, with his quiet dignity and mysterious sack, had already captured the minds of everyone in the room. The old man sat quietly in the lobby, his sack resting beside him like a silent companion. The bank had grown unusually tense. Customers murmured to each other, glancing nervously at him, while some, braver, pulled out their phones, pretending to check messages, but secretly recording every move. The staff whispered behind counters, their laughter from earlier now completely gone. Even the bank manager, who had once scoffed at him, now fidgeted nervously, adjusting his tie, as if the old man's calm confidence made the suits in the room feel small and uncertain. The young teller, who had noticed the markings on the old man's folder, approached him cautiously, curiosity mixed with fear. "Sir, these papers," she said softly, pointing at the folder. "They look very old. I mean, like official. Where did you get them?" The old man looked at her and smiled faintly, a smile that carried both wisdom and patience. "Patience," he said simply. "You will see everything soon enough. For now, just know that truth does not need to shout. It waits quietly until it is seen." The manager, growing frustrated with the delay and the increasing attention of the crowd, cleared his throat loudly. "Sir, I told you already you need to come with us. If you cannot prove your claim immediately, you are disturbing the bank." His voice, firm but trembling slightly, revealed his inner doubt. The old man lifted his head slowly, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I am not disturbing anyone. I am merely present," he replied, his voice soft yet undeniable in authority. There was no anger in it, only calmness, but somehow it made the manager step back a little, unsure of how to continue. Outside the bank, a few people had begun to gather, curious about the crowd inside. One passerby peeked through the glass doors and saw the unusual scene. An old man, polite yet firm, sitting with a sack beside him, surrounded by a silent, uneasy bank staff. Soon, whispers turned into small groups forming on the sidewalk. Someone had already called a local news station. Phones were raised, footage recorded, and in minutes the story was beginning to spread beyond the walls of the bank. Inside, the young teller could not resist her curiosity. She leaned a little closer, glancing at the papers again. There were old contracts, stamps from decades ago, signatures in delicate ink, almost faded by time. She had been trained to spot forgeries, and everything she could see screamed authenticity. She tried to imagine the life of the man in front of her, a man who had apparently kept these documents safe for years, waiting for the right moment. Her mind struggled to reconcile his humble appearance with the immense importance of what he carried. The old man noticed her gaze and nodded slightly. "You are perceptive," he said. "Many look at these papers and see nothing, but those who understand patience and who do not rush to judgment see the truth." His words, calm and measured, seemed to float in the air, leaving a strange silence in the room. The bank employees whispered to each other nervously, realizing that this man was unlike any visitor they had ever encountered. The manager, desperate to regain control, decided to take another approach. He gestured toward the security guards. "Check these papers carefully. If they are legitimate, fine, but if not—" He did not finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavily in the room. The old man simply nodded and gently opened the top of his sack, pulling out another item, a thick, leather-bound ledger. It was worn and cracked from age, but the edges of gold lettering could still be seen faintly. The manager's eyes widened slightly as he leaned forward. "What is that?" asked one of the tellers quietly. "It is the record of all that I have claimed," the old man replied. "Every transaction, every deed, every share. I have waited for many years to show it, and now the time has come." He placed the ledger carefully on the counter, next to the folder of papers. There was no dramatic flourish, no loud announcement. Yet the room felt heavier, as if the air itself acknowledged the weight of the moment. The customers, once whispering and curious, now leaned closer. Even the ones who had mocked the man earlier in their minds felt a strange sense of awe. They could feel the significance of what was being presented, even if they could not yet fully understand it. There was a lesson in every movement the old man made: patience, dignity, and quiet power. He did not raise his voice. He did not demand attention. He simply presented the truth and allowed it to speak for itself. The manager, now clearly unsettled, motioned for the security guards to step back. He could see that this situation was growing beyond his control. Customers' whispers turned into questions, eyes wide with curiosity and fear of being wrong. The old man remained seated, calm and composed, his eyes sweeping across the room, observing reactions without judgment. It was as if he already knew what would happen, as if he had seen this moment in his mind long before stepping into the bank. Time seemed to slow. The laughter from earlier had vanished completely. The employees no longer made jokes. The customers stopped their casual chatter. Everyone waited, almost unconsciously, for the next move, aware that something extraordinary was unfolding. The old man did not rush, did not pressure anyone, and yet he held complete control of the room simply by being himself. The suspense grew heavier with every passing second. People could feel it in their bones. This was no ordinary claim, no ordinary visitor. Something monumental was about to happen, and everyone in the bank, whether they realized it or not, was about to witness it. The old man's ledger and folder sat on the counter, quietly commanding attention. The bank staff circled cautiously, unsure whether to touch the papers or leave them alone. The manager, feeling his authority slipping, took a deep breath and decided to open the folder first. He picked up one of the documents, carefully scanning the faded ink, the official stamps, and signatures that looked as if they belonged to a different era. The more he read, the more his eyes widened. He glanced at the old man, a question forming on his lips, but no words came out. "What? What is this?" he finally asked, his voice shaky. These documents, they seem genuine. But now how?" The old man's lips curled into a small smile. "It is simple. Some truths are hidden not because they are unimportant, but because people do not take the time to notice them. I have waited long enough for someone to see." A young teller, more curious than cautious, leaned in to look. "Sir, these papers, they list ownership shares, investments, and even decisions made decades ago. How is this possible?" The old man remained calm. "It is possible because I kept them safe. Many have forgotten history, but history does not forget. Every action, every decision, every signature is recorded. These papers show what belongs to whom, and in this case, what belongs to me." The manager swallowed hard. He had worked in finance for over 20 years. He knew the importance of ledgers, the proof they carried, and the weight they held in legal matters, but he could not reconcile this image with the man in front of him, frail, old, dressed simply, carrying a dusty sack. How could someone so humble hold undeniable proof of ownership over a bank he managed? The old man gently opened the ledger. The pages were thick, the ink faded, and the handwriting precise, almost elegant. "This ledger," he said softly, "records every transaction, every share, and every decision from the time this bank was founded. Look closely. It is all here, documented, verified, and preserved. Anyone can verify it, but only a patient. I will see it clearly." The manager leaned in, squinting at the tiny letters. At first it seemed like old, meaningless numbers, but slowly the truth emerged. The numbers, the dates, the signatures, all matched the current operations of the bank. It was as if someone had mapped decades of business history onto these pages with perfect accuracy. The staff and customers who had gathered around began to murmur, astonished. "Is it really possible?" asked one of the tellers, barely above a whisper. "Yes," replied the old man. "It is possible when you do not rush, when you respect time, and when you value what others ignore." Suddenly, a young security guard, curious despite his training, leaned closer. "Sir, this ledger, it proves you own a majority of the bank?" The old man nodded slowly. "It does. And now you see why patience and care are more powerful than doubt and laughter." The crowd in the bank grew more attentive. The customers who had come for routine transactions were now witnessing something extraordinary. Phones were out, recording, streaming. News agencies were likely getting clips already. The old man did not mind. He did not need the attention. The truth itself was enough. The manager, feeling both fear and awe, tried to maintain composure. "If this is true, if this ledger and these papers are authentic, then legally you are right. You do own this bank." He looked at the old man's face, expecting arrogance, maybe greed, but he saw none. Only calmness, only dignity. The old man spoke again, quietly, yet every word seemed to resonate. "Ownership is not a claim to power. It is a responsibility. Many who have laughed at me assumed power is loud, visible, and brash. They forgot that responsibility is quiet, patient, and enduring." One of the tellers, now fully convinced, asked the question that hung over everyone. "Sir, if you truly own this bank, why are you here like this? Why not claim it years ago?" The old man's eyes twinkled. "Because timing is everything. The world does not recognize truth when it is shouted. It recognizes truth when it is ready to be seen, and today the world, or at least this bank, is ready." The manager, pale and trembling, took a step back. The laughter that had once echoed in the bank was replaced by silence, thick with tension. Customers whispered to each other, awestruck. The security guards, trained for emergencies, now looked unsure. Every person in the room realized they were witnessing history, a moment that would be remembered long after this day. The old man closed the ledger gently and placed it back into his sack. "All of this is proof," he said. "Not because I demand recognition, but because truth has a way of revealing itself. Today, I am here not to fight, not to argue, but to show what has always been. And now you see it clearly." The manager, finally finding his voice, spoke, but the words sounded weak, almost small compared to the weight of what had just been revealed. "Sir, I suppose I need to verify this with our legal department, but I can see now you were not lying." The old man smiled faintly, as if he had expected this all along. "Verification will take time, as it always does. But doubt cannot erase truth. And those who laughed earlier, they will learn in their own time that the world is not ruled by appearances, but by reality." The room was silent now, except for the whispers of astonishment. Customers, staff, and even the manager understood one thing clearly. The old man with a sack had changed everything in the bank simply by being patient, prepared, and steadfast. Laughter had ended. Awe had begun, and the story of this day was only beginning to spread. After the old man had placed the ledger back into his sack, the bank lobby was filled with a strange tension. People no longer whispered about his age or his appearance. Instead, their eyes were glued to him, filled with disbelief and curiosity. The staff, who had once been so confident, now shuffled nervously behind their counters, unsure of what to do next. The manager, pale and trembling, cleared his throat, realizing that ignoring this man or dismissing him any further was impossible. "Sir," the manager said, his voice strained, "we will need to contact the legal department immediately. You cannot simply claim the bank without proper verification. There are protocols, there are laws." The old man's eyes twinkled, calm yet commanding. "I understand. Laws exist for order. Protocols exist for clarity. But the truth," he said slowly, "does not need permission. It is not dependent on approval or delay. It exists, and those who see it must acknowledge it, willingly or not." A few customers had moved closer, leaning over the counters, straining to listen. One of them whispered, "Do you realize what this means? This man, he might own the bank, all of it." The others nodded, wide-eyed. Phones were quietly raised, capturing the scene. Within minutes, some of the video had already gone live on social media, spreading like wildfire. The manager called his assistant over. "Get me the legal team. Now, explain that we have a situation we cannot ignore." He rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. His thoughts raced. If this man truly owned the bank, then everything they had done, every decision, every policy, every internal joke about the old man, might be irrelevant. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. Meanwhile, the old man remained seated, calm, as if he had expected all of this. He noticed the subtle glances of customers and staff alike, the quiet awe in their eyes, the unspoken question on every face. Who is this man? And how could someone so humble hold such power? He didn't answer directly. There was no need. His presence itself communicated the answers. The legal department arrived within the hour, 3 serious-looking lawyers carrying briefcases and folders, ready for official examination. They approached cautiously, not out of fear, but out of respect for the situation they were about to investigate. One of them, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, knelt down slightly to examine the ledger. She opened it carefully, tracing the pages with her finger, her eyebrows knitting in concentration. "This appears authentic," she murmured. "The signatures match historical records, the dates correspond to corporate filings, and the investments line up perfectly with current ownership." She looked up at the manager. "If this is correct, he is indeed the rightful owner of the bank." The manager felt his knees weaken. "This cannot be possible. How did he—" He stopped mid-sentence, unable to find the words. He turned to the old man, who only smiled faintly, his calm demeanor never breaking. "Many things are possible," the old man said gently. "But most people refuse to believe until evidence is undeniable. Today, the evidence speaks for itself. I've done nothing but preserve what is mine, patiently, quietly, until the right moment." Outside the bank, the story had already begun to spread. Social media posts, videos, and live streams captured the growing crowd. Journalists arrived, cameras and microphones in hand. Headlines flashed across phone screens. "Old man claims bank ownership, proof surprises everyone." And "Local. Hero or banker? Man turns heads with decades-old ledger." The buzz created an atmosphere of chaos, yet inside, the old man's calmness anchored the room. The lawyers began formal procedures, carefully noting the evidence and cross-checking it with government records. The ledger and folder were verified page by page. Each confirmation strengthened the old man's claim, and each confirmation further silenced the bank staff and customers who had once doubted him. Murmurs of admiration and disbelief rippled through the room. One of the bank employees, a young teller who had witnessed everything from the start, finally spoke up. "Sir, you didn't need to shout or demand or threaten anyone. You just showed the truth, and now everyone can see it." The old man nodded. "The truth does not need drama. It only needs to be seen clearly. Those who respect it benefit, those who doubt learn." The manager, realizing the gravity of the situation, finally addressed the old man directly. "Sir, I must apologize. I judged you, laughed at you, and underestimated your patience and your knowledge. I see now that I was wrong." The old man's eyes softened. Acknowledgement is the first step. Learning comes next. Remember that humility is as important as authority. As the formal verification continued, the crowd grew larger outside. People were fascinated by the story of the old man with a sack, quietly proving ownership of a bank they all believed to be beyond dispute. News cameras recorded the scene, capturing the manager's stunned expression, the staff's nervous excitement, and the old man's serene confidence. It was a lesson in patience, preparation, and the power of truth. By the time the lawyers had finished their initial review, it was undeniable. The old man's claim was real. The bank staff could no longer deny it. The manager could no longer argue, and the crowd outside cheered quietly, amazed by the unfolding story. The old man, holding nothing but his sack and his calm demeanor, had turned skepticism into respect, laughter into awe, and doubt into acceptance. And yet, for all the attention, he remained humble. He had no need for accolades or applause. His purpose had been simple: to preserve what was rightfully his, and to let the truth shine when the time was right. The world had noticed, yes, but it had not changed him. Patience, wisdom, and quiet. Strength were his allies, and they had won the day. The old man's claim had been verified. The bank's legal team had confirmed the authenticity of the ledger, the papers, and every signature. Yet inside the bank, the tension had not eased. Staff members whispered nervously behind counters, customers stared in amazement, and the manager paced the floor, unsure of his next move. Ownership was no longer a matter of debate, it was a fact. But now came the difficult part: understanding what it meant in practice. The old man remained calm, as always. He had no need to raise his voice or assert dominance. His presence alone commanded attention, and his patience had already earned respect. Slowly he stepped forward, placing the sack on the counter with care. "Now that truth is clear," he said, "we must consider what responsibility comes with it. Ownership is not about control. It is about stewardship, about making choices that benefit more than just oneself." The manager, his voice shaky, finally spoke. "Sir, what will you do? Do you intend to run this bank yourself? Take over every decision?" The old man shook his head gently. "No, I will not manage day-to-day operations. That is your responsibility, as it has always been. My role is to ensure that what is mine and what belongs to this institution is protected and respected. That may mean reviewing policies, guiding major decisions, and when necessary, correcting errors." The staff exchanged glances, some relieved, others uneasy. The idea that their work could continue with minimal disruption was comforting, but the realization that every decision was now under the scrutiny of the rightful owner was intimidating. The old man noticed their unease and smiled faintly. "Do not fear me. I'm not here to punish. I'm here to restore balance and integrity. Those who act honestly have nothing to worry about." The manager nodded slowly, trying to absorb the wisdom in the old man's words. And those who acted unfairly or ignored rules, they will be held accountable, the old man replied simply. Accountability is not about revenge. It is about ensuring fairness and trust. Laughter, mockery, or negligence has consequences, whether immediate or delayed. As the bank staff processed this, a young teller, the same one who had spoken earlier, asked cautiously, "Sir, what about the customers? How should we explain this to them? They are already aware that you are the owner now." The old man's gaze swept across the lobby, settling on the crowd of onlookers and curious clients. "Truth is self-explanatory," he said softly. "Transparency is key. Share the facts, show the evidence, and let understanding follow naturally. People respect honesty more than authority. That is the principle I will follow here." With that, he reached into his sack and pulled out a set of old keys. They were tarnished, heavy, and clearly used long ago. "These," he said, holding them up, "belong to the founders of this bank. I preserved them just as I preserved the ledger. They are symbols of trust and responsibility. Today, they are returned to the institution they were meant to serve." The manager, overwhelmed, took the keys gently. "Sir, thank you. I don't know what to say. Do not thank me," the old man interrupted softly. "Thank history, thank patience, thank integrity. I did not earn this through haste or force, but through respect for what is right." That is the lesson here. Outside the bank, the story had spread even further. News crews, live streams, and social media posts chronicled every moment. Headlines shouted, "Old man becomes bank owner overnight, a lesson in patience and truth." And local legend, elderly man's ledger changes banking history. Customers who had come for routine banking transactions now shared their amazement online, adding their own photos and videos. Inside, the old man quietly began reviewing the bank's operations. He asked questions about major accounts, high-value transactions, and community programs. He did not interfere with minor details, but focused on patterns and policies that affected fairness, security, and trust. Staff members were surprised at his depth of knowledge, his understanding of finance, and his insight into operational strategy. It was clear that he had not only preserved documents, but also carried decades of wisdom with him. The manager approached him cautiously. "Sir, I never realized you had such experience. You know everything about this bank." The old man smiled faintly. "Experience is not about age alone. It is about observation, study, and patience. I watched, I recorded, and I learned. That is why I am here, and why the truth is finally clear." Word spread that the bank would continue operations, but with a renewed commitment to fairness, transparency, and accountability. Customers felt reassured, seeing that the institution was now guided by someone who valued integrity over arrogance. The staff, initially anxious, began to feel a sense of purpose. Mistakes could be corrected, policies could be improved, and everyone knew that fairness would be recognized and rewarded. The old man returned the ledger to its place in his sack, carefully, with reverence. He looked around the room once more, eyes calm, voice steady. "Remember this day, not for me, but for the lesson it carries. Respect the truth, act with patience, and value integrity above all. The rest will follow naturally." And with that, he stepped back, allowing the bank to continue its operations, knowing that his presence had already changed the course of its history. What had begun as a laugh, a moment of disbelief, had now turned into a profound lesson in respect, patience, and accountability, one that no one inside the bank would ever forget. Days passed, and the bank began to operate under a new, quiet order. The old man did not sit idly. He walked the halls, observed every detail, and spoke to staff and clients with calm authority. He had already earned respect through proof and patience, but now he wanted to ensure the bank ran properly, not just in appearance, but in truth and fairness. The first challenge came unexpectedly. A long-time teller, someone who had always acted friendly, but whose reputation had been questionable, accidentally made a mistake while processing a high-value transaction. The teller's hands shook as they realized their error might have cost the bank thousands of dollars. Normally, such a mistake would result in immediate reprimand or even termination, but the old man chose a different approach. He called the teller to his side. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said gently, his eyes steady but unwavering. The teller swallowed hard. I misread the account number. I thought it was a smaller transaction. I didn't mean to." "Intentions are not the same as results," the old man said. "Mistakes happen. What matters is how we respond. You will correct this error, yes, but you will also review every process, and you will understand why this mistake occurred. Accountability is not punishment. It is understanding and improvement." The teller nodded, relief and respect mixing in their expression. "Yes, sir, I understand. Thank you for not punishing me harshly." The old man smiled faintly. "Fear does not teach. Understanding does." Word of this interaction spread quickly among the staff. They realized that the old man's power was not in anger or fear, but in wisdom. People began to listen more carefully, check their work thoroughly, and approach their jobs with genuine care. Efficiency improved, mistakes decreased, and the overall atmosphere of the bank shifted from tension to cautious optimism. But not all challenges were so small. One afternoon, a client approached with a complaint about an account that had been mishandled for years. The staff had always tried to deflect blame or push the issue aside, but the old man insisted on hearing the case personally. He listened, carefully, reading old documents, verifying transactions, and cross-checking signatures. By the time he finished, he had uncovered decades of negligence by the bank's previous management. He called the staff meeting that evening. "You see," he said, "we cannot pretend that past errors do not exist. Our responsibility is to correct them. Every client deserves honesty and fairness, regardless of how long they have waited," the staff murmured nervously. Some feared that the revelations would lead to punishment, but the old man continued, "Correction is not punishment. We will fix what was wrong. We will compensate where needed, and we will learn so these mistakes never happen again." Within the week, the bank had corrected long-standing errors, reimbursed clients, and improved its policies. Customers began to notice the difference. They shared stories of fairness and respect on social media, praising the bank for finally acting responsibly. The old man had transformed not just the internal workings of the bank, but also its public reputation. Despite these victories, challenges kept coming. A rival bank attempted to dispute one of the old man's claims, thinking that his ownership was weak or questionable. Lawyers contacted the bank, demanding meetings and questioning the ledger's legitimacy. Staff panicked, unsure how to respond. The old man, however, remained calm. He reviewed every document, every contract, every historical filing. He anticipated each argument, preparing evidence that was irrefutable. When the rival bank representatives arrived, confident and dismissive, they were met not with anger, but with precision and authority. Every claim they made was answered with documents, records, and facts that left them speechless. By the end of the day, the rival bank had retreated, realizing their challenge was futile. Staff watched in awe, some whispering, "How does he know so much? How did he prepare for this?" The old man only shook his head slightly. "Knowledge and preparation are more powerful than aggression," he said softly. As the weeks went on, the bank grew stronger. Employees worked with renewed purpose, clients trusted the institution, and the old man's calm authority became legendary. Yet he never let pride take him. He continued to carry his sack, containing the ledger, the old keys, and other documents that symbolized responsibility, not wealth. He reminded everyone that ownership was about stewardship, not control. By the end of Part 6, the old man had not only solidified his ownership, but had proven his wisdom, patience, and strategic thinking. He turned challenges into lessons, errors into improvements, and skepticism into admiration. His presence had become a stabilizing force, ensuring that every action taken in the bank aligned with fairness, truth, and responsibility. And still, despite all he had achieved, he remained humble, patient, and vigilant. He knew that being a guardian of truth was an ongoing task, one that required constant observation, care, and integrity. The old man understood that real power came not from money or authority, but from the respect one earned by acting rightly, calmly, and wisely. Word of the old man's ownership and fair leadership had begun to spread far beyond the walls of the bank. Local business owners whispered about the changes they observed. Neighbors shared stories of how the bank treated clients with newfound respect, and even city officials began to take notice. The old man had never sought fame, but his reputation grew naturally, fueled by his actions rather than his words. One morning, as the bank opened, a group of people entered carrying folders, laptops, and official-looking documents. The staff froze. They had never seen such a large delegation enter the lobby at once. The old man, standing calmly behind his desk, observed them quietly. His eyes were sharp, attentive yet unflinching. "Good morning," one of the visitors said, stepping forward. "We are from the city's Financial Oversight Committee. We've heard reports about this bank's sudden turnaround, and we've come to review operations, compliance, and policies. We hope to understand your methods." The old man nodded slowly. "Please, take your time. All records are available and transparency is welcomed. We have nothing to hide." His calm tone contrasted sharply with the nervous glances exchanged by the committee members. They had expected arrogance, excuses, or evasion, but instead found patience, clarity, and honesty. Over the next several hours, the committee asked questions, reviewed ledgers, and examined internal policies. Staff were nervous at first, but the old man's guidance kept them steady. "Answer truthfully," he advised quietly. "Do not exaggerate. Do not hide. Truth is our strength." By midday, the committee paused for a break. One of the senior members whispered to another, "I've been auditing banks for over 20 years, but I've never seen leadership like this. He doesn't command with fear or intimidation. He teaches with patience and wisdom. It's remarkable." When the review resumed, the old man walked them through the bank's long-standing corrections, policy reforms, and community outreach programs. He explained each decision with clarity, showing not only the what, but the why behind every choice. The committee listened, increasingly impressed. Finally, after hours of discussion, the head of the committee spoke. "Sir, it is clear that your methods are unusual but effective. Most importantly, they restore trust, accountability, and integrity. I must admit, we underestimated you. Your leadership is exemplary." The old man smiled faintly. "Leadership is not about recognition. It is about responsibility. We serve people, not ourselves. That principle has guided this institution for generations, and it continues today." Word of this committee's visit quickly reached the city. Soon requests for meetings, interviews, and advice came from other banks, businesses, and even educational institutions. People wanted to understand the secret behind the old man's ability to restore order, earn respect, and lead wisely. Despite these opportunities, he remained selective. He refused offers of fame or power, choosing instead to focus on what mattered most: the well-being of the bank, its staff, and its clients. "Influence is not about spreading oneself thin," he told a young journalist. "It is about doing right where you can, consistently, patiently, and wisely." The local community began to feel the effects of his leadership as well. The bank offered small business loans to deserving entrepreneurs, provided fair rates to families in need, and organized workshops on financial literacy. The old man did not seek applause for these actions, but the community responded with gratitude and trust. People began to view the bank not as a cold institution of money, but as a guardian of fairness and opportunity. But with rising attention came new challenges. Rival banks, once dismissive, now watched closely, calculating ways to undermine his influence. Some tried legal maneuvers, others attempted to lure clients away with flashy advertisements. Still, none could match the combination of honesty, patience, and integrity that the old man offered. Every attempt to destabilize the bank only reinforced the contrast between greed and genuine leadership. One afternoon, a letter arrived, signed by several high-ranking city officials. They requested a private meeting to discuss broader financial reforms, recognizing the old man's methods as a model for transparency and ethical leadership. The old man accepted, but he knew this meeting was not about personal gain. It was about responsibility and setting a standard for others to follow. Before leaving for the meeting, he looked around the bank at the staff who now carried themselves with confidence and pride. He smiled quietly. The journey was far from over, but the seeds he had planted, trust, patience, accountability, and integrity, were growing strong. He had turned what began as laughter and doubt into respect and influence, not through force, but through wisdom. As he stepped out into the sunlight, the old man carried not just his sack and ledger, but the understanding that true leadership spreads silently, shaping communities, inspiring individuals, and transforming systems from within. The world had noticed, and yet he remained humble, patient, and vigilant, knowing that real change required constant care, unwavering principles, and thoughtful action. Months had passed since the old man had claimed the bank. What began as laughter and doubt had now turned into admiration, respect, and even fear from those who once mocked him. His quiet authority and wisdom had transformed not only the bank, but also the entire community surrounding it. Yet, he knew his work was not yet done. There were still skeptics, rival institutions, and individuals who underestimated him. He carried on with the same patience and humility that had guided him from the very beginning. One bright morning, the bank's doors opened to an unusual scene. A crowd had gathered outside, whispers of curiosity and amazement spreading quickly. Local news crews, city officials, and even representatives from other banks were present. Inside, staff moved confidently, guided by the old man's calm presence. He stood near the entrance, holding his familiar sack, a symbol not of wealth, but of responsibility, carrying with it the lessons and authority that had earned him his position. The first to approach was a group of rival bank executives. They had come, not to challenge him, but to understand the secret behind his sudden rise and the loyalty he had inspired. Their eyes were filled with doubt, skepticism, and a hint of fear. "We thought this bank was weak," one executive admitted, quietly. "We underestimated you," the old man smiled, a soft, knowing expression. "Weakness is often mistaken for simplicity," he replied. "Strength is not always loud. It can be quiet, patient, and consistent. That is what you see here." The executives, hesitant but curious, followed him through the bank. They observed the staff handling clients with efficiency and respect, the careful checks in every transaction, and the open discussions about accountability and transparency. They saw a system built not on shortcuts, greed, or intimidation, but on fairness, trust, and wisdom. Everything here is based on principles, the old man explained. Principles that do not change with time, trends, or threats. The work we do affects real lives. Mistakes have consequences, and honesty is the foundation of trust. Those who understand this succeed. Those who ignore it fail. Even the skeptical executives had to admit they were impressed. They realized that their attempts to belittle him, to dismiss his claim to the bank, had been foolish. The man they had laughed at was not just an owner, he was a leader, a teacher, and a visionary. They left quietly, some muttering apologies, others silently promising never to underestimate such resolve again. Meanwhile, the city officials approached. They had come to witness firsthand the impact the old man had created. Families, small business owners, and community leaders shared stories of how the bank had helped them. Loans given fairly, advice offered without judgment, and patience extended to those in need. Each story reinforced the man's reputation, not just as a banker, but as a guardian of fairness and opportunity. The old man listened attentively to every voice, nodding with quiet respect. "True success," he said softly, "is measured not by profit alone, but by the lives we touch, the trust we build, and the integrity we uphold. Money is a tool. Character is the true currency." By afternoon, the once skeptical community had become united in admiration. Parents spoke to their children about the old man's example, teaching them that wisdom, patience, and fairness were more powerful than wealth or force. Students wrote essays about him in schools. Journalists published stories highlighting his methods, and the bank itself became a model for institutions across the city. Yet even as accolades grew, the old man remained humble. He did not sit back to enjoy fame or recognition. Instead, he continued walking the halls of the bank, ensuring every transaction was accurate, every client treated fairly, and every staff member encouraged to grow in knowledge and responsibility. He reminded them constantly that ownership was stewardship, not dominance. One evening, as the sun set and cast golden light across the city, the old man stood outside the bank, looking at the bustling streets. People waved, thanked him, or simply smiled. He thought of the day he first walked in with his sack, laughed at by those who thought him foolish. So much had changed since then. Those who had mocked him had learned humility, those who doubted him had learned respect, and those who followed him had learned the value of patience, wisdom, and integrity. The old man carried on, knowing that true leadership was never complete. It was not measured by victories alone, but by the principles left behind, the lives touched, and the systems strengthened. The bank was more than a building. It was a beacon of fairness, an example to the world, and a testament to the power of calm authority, knowledge, and integrity. As night fell, the city lights reflected in the windows of the bank. The old man held his sack one last time, before placing it carefully on the desk. It had carried the weight of responsibility, proof of ownership, and the symbol of the journey that had begun with doubt and laughter. He smiled quietly, knowing that while challenges would continue, he had built something that could endure beyond any obstacle. And so, the story of the old black man with a sack came to a powerful conclusion, not because he defeated everyone with force, but because he led with wisdom, integrity, and patience, transforming skepticism into respect, laughter into admiration, and doubt into lasting trust. Those who once laughed at him now remembered his name with reverence, and the city would never forget the lesson he had silently, patiently, and wisely taught them all.